RegTech for 6-year-olds. Everything you want to know about RegTech, but just didn't ask.
This is RegTech for 6-year-olds, conversations at the intersection of regulation and technology. I'm Danny Lawlor from Aquest, and this is our buy versus build episode. If you're new to the Aquest YouTube channel, do hit the subscribe button. Of course, if you like the video, don't be shy about hitting the like button as well. For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Walsh, who's the CEO of Reitigh Software, to guide us through the kind of factors that inform decisions for firms deciding whether to buy technology or build it in-house. Thanks very much for joining us, Brian.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for having me.
I guess when it comes to build versus buy, the decision that firms make on which route to go down is obviously a key part of the entire process. When do you find that you get engaged with the firm? Have they already made that decision, or do you have to help them to get over the line?
Oh, sometimes it depends. I think generally the process that companies would follow is that they would have a consulting company that would advise them on upcoming regulatory requirements. That consulting company would typically help them prepare an RFP and would prepare a short list of viable software companies that could help them achieve that. And typically the company will interact pre-RFP a little bit, talking to some of these companies that they might be familiar with from other engagements, and try and understand what the solution that they have built is, and to kind of get the vendor's view of the problem. And part of that discussion, the company will never say that that's about them deciding build or buy, because they're engaging you as a potential sales target. But they will sometimes be thinking about whether they could handle this internally. I think in recent times, the proliferation of available options has meant that there aren't that many people looking to build internally. It does still happen, and it does still happen, but it's not a huge number of companies that are doing that. So mostly, when I go in at the start, they've kind of decided that they're heading down the road of buying something.
I guess that's a good point there, Brian. The world has shifted over the last 15 to 20 years in terms of the amenability that firms have to build versus buy. And maybe if you went back 15, 20 years, the default or the assumption was that you would try and build if at all possible. Whereas nowadays, with the proliferation of providers and the solutions available and how robust they are and the experience and expertise amongst RegTech providers, it's nearly now flipped, so that the expectation is that you will buy in a solution rather than build it yourself. But once you get through that RFP process, I guess sometimes that can get challenged again by perhaps internal IT or other resources that the firm might have to say, are you really sure that you want to buy this in? Maybe we could build. So you end up maybe doing that twice, that conversation of build versus buy.
Exactly. So typically the RFP process will be with the business. So you will go in and talk to the business and get hit with a lot of very complex questions about how the regulation applies to the business itself, and how the software could help them do that, or what our view is of the regulation in relation to the specific challenges that they have. But it's all from a business perspective. After you're selected as the preferred vendor, you then go into a more deeper dive IT involvement or an assessment. Typically, when depending on the politics of the company, sometimes when you start talking to IT departments, they love to build things themselves. You know, they're quite technical as well, and they're looking at the problem as you're explaining it to them, going, "Well, I could do this. I think I'd enjoy solving this problem. Don't pay these guys to build it. I'll build it myself." So sometimes it depends on the culture of the company, but sometimes that does happen. Yeah.
So when that decision is made, I'm imagining I'm the CEO or I'm part of the leadership team making the decision, but I'm not a techie person. I'm not from a software development background. What are the three core reasons, or the three drivers that make the firm, the organization decide, yes, we're going to go down the buy road? I guess even as a non-techie, cost is probably the first thing that pops into my head.
Yeah, so there may be an assumption that it is cheaper to build it yourself. And I think that depends on the place that you are from a technical perspective and the kind of staff that you have on hand. So if you are going to build something, you are probably going to pay a majority of a one-off cost to build it. You're going to pay developers, testers, your business people to build something up front. Whereas if you buy something, the vast majority of RegTech solutions are going to be licensed. So you're going to have an ongoing license fee. Now they'll both have maintenance, so you will have to maintain the software. But depending on who you actually got to build it, the cost of maintenance may be higher on either side. And I think it's not an intuitive understanding to say, well, I'm paying these people anyway, so they're just my employees, and I might as well get them to do this work for me. So I think the big driver here is going to be on maintenance. So let's say that you had if you want to solve a regulatory problem, you have someone who's going to read the regulation and define it and define what's required. So if you're going to build it in-house, that's going to be your business people. They're going to give that spec then to your developers. And if you have a team of developers on hand, they're probably quite generalist developers in that you're using those developers to solve an awful lot of problems for you. They're not specific regulatory developers like I would have employed on my team. And they're people who are building some automation, they're moving files around, they're building things for portals, or they're building back-end automation. They're not just building regulatory solutions. And then ultimately you'll have a testing team. And most financial services companies will have a testing team on staff, because even if they're buying in solutions, they have to test it internally. So there will be an internal testing team that will be there to test it. Where the costs can start to ramp up in maybe unintended ways is that if you have your business people define the problem that they give to the developers, if that is the same person who is going to test was it built correctly, that's a real problem from a system design point of view. That you now have the person who specs the system testing, did the developers build what they want? And the only kind of issues that they're going to find is, did the developer not build the spec that I asked them to build? The solution to that is that you need another set of business people who are going to then test the system. And now you're really ramping up the cost, because now you have the team of business people who spec the system and a completely separate team of business people who are going to test the system. Similarly, on developers, you're going to have, are they in-house developers? If they are in-house developers, they're quite generalist, but they are on staff. If you don't have in-house developers, or they don't have the capacity to do it, you're going to hire in a team of consultants. And that can get really expensive from a maintenance point of view, because when the project is done, they're going to walk out the door, and you are going to have changes. The regulation is going to change, or your business is going to change, and you're going to need to change the system. And if those people are consultants, getting them back in might be really expensive. Or if they're unavailable, trying to get another team to pick up an old code base that they didn't write themselves could be astronomically expensive.
So I guess then, if I'm in a decision-making role, cost is obviously important, but I need to think not just about the obvious costs, the immediate costs, but into the medium and long term, how things start to play out when you start to think about maintenance and updating. So
exactly.
What about control? Because I guess control must be a big issue that firms will look at when they're deciding build versus buy.
Yeah, so most regulatory solutions are a cost center. They're not being used to leverage new sales opportunities. So where you're looking to get control, it is not from the perspective of gaining a competitive advantage over the other people in the market. It's not like my regulatory solution is going to enable me to directly make more sales to end customers than another one. But from a control perspective, I think we're more looking towards, is the solution going to fit my needs? So most businesses will be operating quite differently to other businesses in the industry, either in terms of the products that they sell or in terms of the back-end systems that they have. So the legacy issues that they have are going to be quite unique between companies. And that can often involve quite a bespoke requirement on the solution to solve the regulatory need. I think the vast number of people who are selling regulatory solutions has kind of upended that control, because there are so many now, there's so much competition to be the chosen vendor. There's much more openness from the vendor side to customize the solution, or to involve the business in the design, where the business can have some say in the design of the solution. And that kind of removes the control issue, in that, okay, you could build it all yourself and get exactly what you want, but most vendors now will be open to taking feature requests and to customizing the solution for your needs.
Which probably explains a little bit why we've seen that shift from the default being build to the default being buy now, because of the proliferation of vendors, the competition, and the willingness now to take something that they've built and tailor it for an individual client, so that client now gets that level of control. So that's called control. What's the other feature then that gets that over the line, that decision to go down the build route?
So I think the other big thing is a kind of sense of legal realism that needs to be applied when you're implementing a regulatory solution. So the regulator will create quite a broad brush strokes regulation. It won't be tailored to particular lines of business or to particular classes of companies. And the reason they do that is that they don't want a kind of an arbitrage system where the company is trying to change the legal structure of the contracts they're selling, or to try and twist the lines of business that they're selling to say, oh, well, that regulation doesn't apply to me anymore because I'm no longer that legal class anymore. And that means that when you're reading the regulation, you can't just take an insular view of, I pick up this regulatory document, I've downloaded a 200-page PDF, and I'm going to read it and understand exactly how to solve this regulation. Because you can only use the regulation as a kind of a guide to how the regulator is going to act. It is not a hardened set of rules that the regulator is going to follow. And I think coming from a programming background, there's a tendency to read the law as like programming code. It will say, well, if condition A or condition B or condition C, then perform this action. Whereas that's not the way it works in reality. In reality, it is a kind of a guide to the regulator, and different regulators will have different focuses, and different companies can kind of choose. There's often quite a degree of decision making that can be made within the regulation. And for a company who is implementing a regulation to know which decisions to make or which parts to focus on, you kind of need a wider view of the market. And bringing in RegTech providers can help provide that wider view of the market, because they're implementing with a wide range of companies, and there's kind of a sharing of information there across to see how the market is responding in general.
Yeah, that absolutely is a very valuable piece where the buy solution can add. And certainly when we work with either RegTech firms or with firms that are implementing RegTech solutions, it's that the rules will, as you said, they're drafted usually in a way that focuses on an outcome and tries to prevent circumvention, tries to prevent individual firms creating some workaround to avoid regulation. And rather than that, say, we want to achieve investor protection. And so understanding what your peers are, understanding your regulator expectations, understanding how the nature, scale, and complexity of your business means you should take a particular route compared to other firms. That's a very important part of building a solution that works for your firm, and then keeping that under review into the future so that you continue to have the right solution. Thank you very much, Brian. Let's wrap it up there. I guess in summary, we're talking about the key factors that get firms to build over buy are understanding costs, not just in the immediate term, but down the tracks, control and being able to get the solution that's pre-made, tailored for your own needs, and then this kind of legal understanding or this insight and interpretation to understand not only what the rules are, but how do they apply to my business given the nature, scale, and complexity of what I'm trying to do and the outcome that the regulators are trying to achieve. So there we leave it for this episode of RegTech for 6-year-olds. As said, if you like it, do hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to the Aquest YouTube channel to keep up to date with all of our latest videos.